Growing up in the Green Bay area, I've been familiar with what Oneida Nation is my whole life. As a child, Oneida Nation to me was just a group of people that had a golf course and a casino that my parents went to sometimes. Until I took this class, I was not aware of how much more Oneida Nation is than just a casino and a golf course, or any tribal nation for that matter. I was not aware how important and valuable land is to these tribes. Tribal sovereignty is something I was not educated on, but it is something every single tribe in the United States deals with. To start, I will talk about what tribal sovereignty is in the United States. Tribal sovereignty can be defined as the ability to govern, to protect, and enhance the health, safety, and welfare of tribal citizens within tribal territory. In other terms, it means the right for Native people to govern themselves. This term's definition can be changed depending on who you are speaking to, but it is something that many tribes in the United States struggle with because the U.S. government believes they can govern Indigenous people better than Indigenous people can govern themselves. Now for some history on tribal sovereignty in the United States. To start, the United States Constitution is based off tribal government. The founding fathers of the United States saw tribal government as something to be admired and emulated. When the founding fathers came to America, their government style was very similar to how the Europeans would govern. Disagreements in the United States government changed from everyone yelling at each other to letting each person speak individually. This change happened after they watched how Indigenous people governed their people. Then, in 1831, the Supreme Court in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia stated that Indian nations had full legal right to manage their own affairs, govern themselves, and have political relationships with the United States federal government. Then, in the 1900s, the U.S. government had a change of heart. Federal officials adopted a goal of assimilation and initiated efforts to end the reservations and the tribal government system altogether. Between the years of 1880 and 1930, the U.S. federal government began their termination era. Tribal land was taken away from a lot of natives, and their governments began to weaken greatly. In 1934, they began the Indian Reorganization Act to try and restore some of the land that was lost. Since then, there have been many acts to try and give natives the sovereignty they were promised, but many tribes still struggle with. Moving on to the history of tribal sovereignty in Wisconsin. The first arrival of Europeans happened in 1634. French and English fur traders were the first to arrive, led by Jean Nicolet and missionary Jacques Marquette. In 1804, they forced the Sauk and Fox tribes to cede their land claimed in southern Wisconsin in a treaty the Sauk and Fox tribes did not agree to, which ended up leading to the Black Hawk War of 1832. At the time, the largest tribe in Wisconsin, the Menominee, was forced to sell away 11,600 square miles of land along the lower Fox River. The Treaty of Prairie du Chien was created so the United States could end intertribal warfare that was disrupting the fur trade and creating tension between the settlers and the tribes. Then, in 1871, most Indigenous people in Wisconsin were placed on reservations and the government ended their treaties with them. Their focus changed to de-Indianizing. They started creating more schools and creating separate schools for Indigenous people. The House Concurrent Resolution of 1953 moved a lot of Indigenous people to more urban areas with the end goal of assimilation. Many of them fled to Milwaukee, Chicago, or St. Paul, Minnesota. Indigenous people were given more rights, the biggest one being the right to own and run a casino. Some casinos created were the Ho-Chunk, Ojibwa, Mohawken, and Potawatomi. Moving on to the Oneida Nation's issues with tribal sovereignty. Oneida Nation is not originally from the Green Bay area of Wisconsin. They date back to the Five Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, which held millions of acres of land in what is now New York. The Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1784 established the Five Nations as in peace with the United States government, But then when New York was established as a state, the Oneida lost more than 5 million acres of their land. The Oneida moved to Wisconsin in the 1820s and purchased 5 million acres of land from the Winnebago and Menominee tribes. The Treaty of 1838 established the present-day Oneida Reservation boundaries in northeast Wisconsin, which comprised of 65,430 acres. The Dawes Act of 1887 challenged this land, and as a result, they lost a few thousand acres. To this day, Oneida Nation is trying to gain more of their land back as well as establish themselves as a strong government. They are trying to preserve their sovereignty by exercising the inherent right to self-govern over members in the Oneida Reservation boundaries. On the map shown, the land the Oneida originally purchased is colored in teal. The land they currently hold is colored in pink. It is showing how much land the Oneida Nation has really lost over the years. Oneida Nation currently occupies the land on Green Bay's west side. On this land there is a Walmart, Sam's Club, and many other stores and restaurants. Because these establishments occupy Oneida Nation reservation land, they must follow the Oneida Nation guidelines. During the last election in Oneida Nation, many of the candidates were encouraging diversifying their revenue because of 3 casinos that had to close due to the pandemic, which means Oneida Nation needs more land to diversify their revenue. Then, in 2016, the village of Hobart, which is located within the Oneida Reservation, Hobart was trying to impose ordinances on the tribe, issuing a citation to Oneida Nation for failing to apply for a permit to hold its Big Apple Fest. Hobart argued that due to the Dawes Act of 1887, which stated that the president was allowed to break up the reservation land into allotments, meaning the reservation was technically in pieces and the tribe must abide by local regulation. Initially, a federal judge of Green Bay sided with Hobart, stating that the village is no longer exempt from local ordinances on land it owns within the village of Hobart. On appeal, the Circuit Court Judge David Hamilton sided with Oneida Nation, ruling that the 65,000-acre reservation still stands because Congress never acted to dissolve it. The district court failed to consider the entire history of events, including the Indian Reorganization Act, which attempted to reserve the allotment acts to stem the loss of tribal land. Because of the appeals court decisions, it means more opportunities for Indigenous people to be able to develop housing for tribal members in Hobart without being subject to apply for building permits through the village of Hobart. Then, in February of 2021, Oneida Nation and the City of Green Bay finalized a jurisdiction and revenue sharing agreement that better recognizes tribal sovereignty in the portion of the city that lies within the reservation. The original agreement expired in 2016 in part because of the objections to the city's inability to levy a property tax on certain tribal-owned properties. There are 5 big takeaways that come from this disagreement, the first being the agreement acknowledges the tribe's right to seek to convert property into a federal trust. The City of Green Bay agrees not to challenge decisions to place properties in the trust and that those properties are exempt from property taxes as long as tribal officials inform the city of their intentions with the land. Secondly, Oneida Nation must pay a flatline annual payment to the city for routine maintenance, the first payment being $322,192 in 2021 and eventually becoming $625,000 by 2031. Thirdly, Oneida Nation's zoning and building code laws must be applied to all individuals and businesses who want to build on Oneida land. Fourthly, the agreement continues that tribal and city police departments maintain backup for each other. And fifthly, Oneida Nation agreed to make a $150,000 donation to Bay Beach Wildlife Sanctuary as a gesture of good faith. And finally, the main issues when addressing this problem are that the City of Green Bay and villages nearby have not complied with the original treaty agreements many times, which make it difficult for Oneida Nation to have full tribal sovereignty. Another big problem is that the city of Green Bay wants to expand more west, which is the Indian reservation land. If the city continues to do this, they are taking away more reservation land while Oneida Nation is trying to gain more land back. Tribal sovereignty within Oneida Nation and tribal sovereignty within the entire United States are very, very similar. Previous treaties being ignored in Oneida Nation is something that happens with almost every other tribe in the United States, as well as state governments being more careless with their tribes than the federal government of the United States. Tribes throughout all of the U.S. have been moved from their land or are simply being bought out. There are many challenges when addressing this issue, some being Green Bay can try and argue that the Oneida people did not originate on this land they currently occupy, so the land is not technically theirs. Secondly, there are so many treaties that have been signed, and a lot of the state government officials do not know about these treaties, or the treaties are just not being enforced. And lastly, many state and local governments want the tribal land because of the resources on them, so they try and assimilate Native Americans so they can economically profit off of these land.